Welcome to another episode of the Adventures in DevOps podcast. This week, I'm doing an interview with the folks from IBM. They're talking about the tool they just released called CUI. And our guests, I don't know if I remember all of your names. I talked to Priya a couple weeks ago. Priya, do you want to introduce yourself and then introduce your cohorts in crime over there?
All right, sure. So hi, my name is Priya Nagpurkar, and I'm the Director of Cloud Platform Research at IBM. So we are the research organization, and we work on Kubernetes, cloud platform, developer experience. That's today's topic, and so we have Nick Mitchell with us, who is a research staff member and also the technical lead for CUI. So you're going to hear from Nick about how we are simplifying developer experience with command line interfaces, dealing with cloud services and cloud platform. And then we have Paul Castro, who is the manager of the broader serverless team. So we're really strong believers in forwarding the serverless kind of methodology and principles here of making cloud programming as simple as possible. So that's the team here today to
Awesome.
talk about CUI.
Hey folks, this is Charles Max Wood, and I just launched my book, The Max Coder's Guide to Finding Your Dream Developer Job. It's up on Amazon. We self-published it. I would love your support. If you want to go check it out, you can find it there, The Max Coder's Guide to Finding Your Dream Developer Job. Have a good one. Max out. Yeah, that's exciting. Let's start, though, before we get too deep into CUI. Let's talk about the IBM Cloud Research Team. Like, what is that all about?
Sure. So, as I said in the introduction, I represent the Cloud Platform Research Team. We also have Cloud Infrastructure Research that deals more with the kind of future hardware and, the stack below Kubernetes, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And my team, the Cloud Platform Research Team, we are really looking at areas including Kubernetes, DevOps, microservices, serverless technologies. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And also, containers, of course, is a big focus area here. So when we talk about Kubernetes as the orchestration mechanism for containers, we're really looking at cloud native platform and how this platform should evolve. And really what motivates us is what will people want to build on the cloud? What will people run on the cloud? And as IBM, we of course care about enterprise clients and enterprise workloads. So our focus, I said earlier, we're really passionate about serverless, and we're passionate about it because we know that to really unleash the potential of the cloud and to make progress on what kind of things people can build on it, we need to make programming on the cloud much more easier than it is today. So that's what we mean by serverless, where we want really the developers, every line of code they write, every moment of time they spend thinking about it, to be about that business logic and not about the complexity of the platform or the fact that it's multi-cloud and I have multiple clusters and multiple vendors and providers. So on the one hand, you want that simplicity. On the other hand, of course, complexity is there because you have to care about things like security, compliance, scale. How do you provide all these features, but at the same time, free developers from having to be bogged down by these? So that's kind of the overall mission, and it includes, so we do have the distributed system skills, the Kubernetes skills, but our vision is let the platform do more for you, and let us build the tools that makes your job as building applications and managing them on the cloud, not only, more productive, but also fun and delightful. So that's what CUI is about. How can we have that delightful developer experience?
Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. And I think, what I will say is I mentioned our expertise. I mean, it's the usual inverted pyramid, right? We want kind of to put our extensive expertise in distributed systems to work for people trying to build things on the cloud. So in the past, we have, to include some of the past work we have done towards these goals, we have done Apache OpenWhisk, which was the first open source platform for this notion of functions as a service, which means, how can I easily run small stateless actions on a container-based cloud platform. So that was Apache OpenWhisk. We did Istio, which was also, and it is an open source project. And the thought there was, again, similar. How do you, now that you are in this microservices world, the complexity shifts from developing these individual components to their interdependencies, their communication. So that was the notion behind Istio, which is also described as a service mesh, right? And it says, okay, let the developer offload to the mesh all the complexities of resiliency, secure communication, and so on. And I think starting from like Apache OpenWhisk, Istio, we are big contributors to Kubernetes, and it's a key part of our platform. And now then to kind of more of DevOps and developer experience, we have KUI, which we'll talk about today. But also building on Istio, we have Iterate, which is another open source project in this. How do I enable experimentation? How do I take those, platform features that come from Kubernetes, Istio, and how do I enable better experimentation around new releases, A/B testing, and so on?
Right. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And it's, you're talking about a lot of these things like Kubernetes or Istio or OpenWhisk, which I really want to go play with, by the way. And as I look at these tools, I'm much more on the developer end. I don't talk to as many people who do infrastructure. I do on this show. We kind of dabble in it on some of the other shows. And so the way you're talking about this as far as, hey, how do we enable this? How do we open up the possibilities with this? Make it so that people can take advantage of the infrastructure that's out there for them. This is something that I hear developers complain about a lot, right? It's, oh, well, I have to figure out Docker, and then I have to, now I have a container. What do I do with it? And how do I get it orchestrated and put up? And, and then Kubernetes, what exactly does Kubernetes do for me? And am I going to mess it up? And so, yeah, the idea of having tools that make it approachable and then be able to take advantage of the powerful features that are there, it's really, really important.
Yeah, and that's a lot of what, as Priya said, serverless, it's hard not to hear about serverless these days because there's so much hype around it. But really, if you think about specific technologies, really the value is exactly what you said, which is, can we allow the developers to do something really wonderful on the cloud without having to manage all of the things they have to do today? So, in the old days, you could just, fire up your IDE, you could write some code, somebody else would deploy for you. But even just to write cloud native code today, you have to actually manage, in some sense, a development cloud. And so there's a lot of things you have to do besides coding just to get things to work. And as Priya was saying, if you look at the things we're looking at, the service mesh, we're looking at OpenWhisk, you see this trend from VMs going into containers going to container management, the container management itself becoming something like a functions as a service, or even something as like a serverless cloud that you would get in Knative, which is something we're also looking at. We're moving into this direction where there's this trend that we want the cloud to be as accessible to developers as possible. And I have an anecdote where I was commuting on the train, and behind me was a Python developer talking about how excited he was because he had discovered this functions as a service to help him build his application, and he loved it because all he had to do was write some Python code and then run it. And I think that that's really what we want to target, is we want to be able to make sure that the cloud itself is the most powerful development platform that you can use without actually having to worry about really the low-level things that you have to do today.
Exactly. So I think, as passionate as we are about the technologies that we have developed, like Istio and OpenWhisk or even Kubernetes, I think they should be as invisible as possible, really speaking.
Yes.
The developers should not have to deal with the complexities of any of these.
One of the remarkable things I found when I was at KubeCon in San Diego a few weeks ago, one of the talks I went to was from, I think, Airbnb and Lyft, I think, were giving a presentation on 10 ways to mess up your Kubernetes cluster. And the talk. And it was sort of usual suspects. You have to make sure you shard your deployment so that failures don't cascade. All these sort of lessons learned that any infrastructure maintainer kind of knows. But most application developers are learning the lessons again and again, every time. And apparently Airbnb learned 10 important lessons in the process of basically developing their own cloud at a very low level. And I think that's the kind of theme that I think tooling and in general, higher level abstractions can help with.
Yep, absolutely. So we're talking about serverless and Kubernetes and, the different ways that we can pull all this stuff together. And CUI, from what I understand, focuses mostly on Kubernetes. But I've seen Kubernetes also kind of pitched as the way to accomplish a lot of these other things like serverless, right? So you just spin up a container that does your serverless function, right? Except I haven't even worried about the container level layer, let alone any of the rest of it, right? So is Kubernetes kind of going to be the platform going forward that we really care about in the ops and DevOps space? Or is this kind of a stepping off point to something else? I
mean, this is a good question, and I'm going to hand over to Nick just after a couple of comments here, because actually CUI is more than just for Kubernetes. So I want definitely him to address that. But I think to your point, right? And I just said that we would like it to be invisible, really. But today we are still building those abstractions, right? We are still today a developer who is building a container as microservice is still interacting with Kubernetes, and kubectl is kind of the CLI, the interface where I kind of say, okay, now deploy this, bring the service up for me. And a lot of the DevOps tasks around deploying things, operating them, looking at their health, getting the logs, and all of these tasks, the various DevOps workflows. And I think Nick can comment more on which ones did we identify as high value ones. We are interacting, developers are having to interact with Kubernetes today. I think the platform itself continues to evolve so that we really build better layers of abstraction where these interactions will change in the future. So as I think Paul mentioned, I just care about Python code, and here it is, and don't even care if it's deployed on Kubernetes. So we are making progress there too. So Kubernetes is certainly the platform underneath, right? That is, I think it has several kind of great attributes about why the industry at large is converging around Kubernetes as the platform for containerized cloud-native workloads and applications going forward. And at the same time, we are building better abstractions, be it with Knative, which is an open source project. As they evolve, I think the nature of interaction of developers will also evolve. And, so I think that said, CUI has a philosophy that extends to far more than Kubernetes. I think today, since Kubernetes community, faces key pain points, I think that's why we chose to focus. But I think Nick can say both about the beginnings and why we are focusing on Kubernetes now and how this might evolve in the future, right, from a CUI perspective.
Right. Yeah, so we actually started, I've had basically my career now at IBM spanning 19 years now.
Oh, wow.
Working on tools. Yeah, it's a long history. But if you actually look back at all the stuff I've worked on, it's tools in various forms, from old Java-based tooling, with AWT and all that swing, into browser-based tooling, and that whole world of consoles, and now to CUI. It's remarkable to think about that there's really are some common themes. You asked whether or not Kubernetes is going to be the abstraction we think about in the future, and it's hard to say for certain. We may have better higher level abstractions, but I think what will remain constant and is this need for exploration. I think that's one of the big things that we find again and again in tooling, to allow for this kind of open-ended exploration. That you have to be able to pose questions. The tool will give you some answers, some partial answers, and you need to be able to refine what you see into better questions so that you can get the actual answer you need. And that's really what tools are helping to enable, that kind of exploration.
Right.
And it turns out that, and I've spent a lot of time developing browser-based consoles, and they're pretty awesome. In fact, I was just talking with some of our colleagues here before, and I think I've heard this from a number of people that the beauty, the ease of use of consoles is definitely something we should aspire to. At the same time, those consoles oftentimes are fairly limiting because the designers have to design in certain use cases, which is the very power of them. They're making these high-level use cases like create a cluster or modify a cluster or make a new container of a certain, or those Python actions. We can codify those high-level tasks, which is very beneficial. But at the same time, as soon as you need to go off the rails a little bit, just a little bit from what the designers had anticipated, if you're asking a question that they didn't anticipate, or not quite posing it in not quite the way they anticipated, the browser-based console becomes almost a dead end. Because it can only do so much. There's only so many buttons you can click on the screen. And so command line interfaces, CLIs, are, I think, a natural place people gravitate to because they allow for that much more open-ended kind of question and answer. I can say kubectl get pods, and then to get the list of my pods in my cluster, if I want then to ask for the details of a particular pod, but I only care about the status, or I want to format it in a particular way because some other tooling needs to consume the output in a particular way. Maybe it needs JSON or needs YAML. I can do all that from a command line. I can choose whether the output is YAML or JSON. I can choose to project out certain fields. I can sort of do whatever I want because kubectl is such a well-designed CLI. There's no way I could get that kind of open-ended kind of interaction model with the console. So that's kind of the tension that I found over the years with tooling. In fact, I work on the OpenWhisk project. One of my first tasks as I was working on that project was to design their browser-based console. And concurrently with my work, the CLI developers were working on the OpenWhisk CLI. And I almost felt a bit of envy that they were able to do things very quickly as they developed the tooling that would take me forever in the browser-based console. Because in a console, you have to design it. You have to make graphics. You have to make icons. You have to choose the color scheme. You have to make sure you're consistent with the color scheme of the larger platform.
I guess just one point is that it's not that CLIs don't undergo design, but not to the extent that you would have in a console. So
yeah, the visual design requires a different skill set, whereas the command line, the focus is on the command line.
Right. Yeah. Oftentimes it reflects, say, some backend API that the CLI. Whereas, as Nick was saying, a console will be task-oriented, and so there will be certain tasks that that console may be optimized for, but that is both good and bad in the sense that it's good if that's what you're trying to do. But as you know, debugging, for instance, it's an intellectual exercise. You have to do detective work. So not every bug is the same. And so how do you encourage exploration? As I have had conversations with Nick about this, how do you encourage the exploration and aid the developer in discovering things, but not necessarily over-optimize or lock that developer into a certain path?
Yeah, so it's kind of the tension that I was trying to explore when I first started thinking about this, the CUI project at the time. It wasn't called CUI. It was called Function Shell because we were working on Cloud Functions.
Fair enough.
But we want to, so the fact is that I love the ability to encode tasks, to have graphics, to be able to click on links as opposed to have to copy and paste long auto-generated names. There's a lot of reasons to love a console, even to love a browser-based console, even if you're some super duper expert that's worked on CLIs for dozens of years. There's browser-based consoles are attractive, I think, even to those jaded, old school developers. But that limiting factor for this debugging kind of question answer exploration is a big problem. So the question is, can we find some marriage between those two worlds? Can we have it so that we have a CLI sort of oriented experience so that I can go off the rails when I need to? I can say -o YAML or -o JSON if I want one or the other output, without having to wait 6 months for the designer to add a JSON button in their UI. That was sort of what we're trying to explore. I want to be able to issue a command, for example, kubectl get pods, and instead of seeing just ASCII art, I'd like to see HTML. And that HTML could just be, to start with, an HTML table, but maybe now we can think about instead of just showing the resource name, I can make the resource name clickable. And when I click on that name, for example, the name of my pod, instead of having to copy and paste the name of the pod and retype a command, kubectl get pod, paste -o YAML, which is what you'd have to do in a pure CLI, I just click on a link. And so that's where I feel like, we focus on Kubernetes for the past year or so because it's a pretty hot commodity. It's an important market. But I think this general notion of enhancing this detective work, enhancing the debugging and development experience, because oftentimes development is debugging simultaneously, right? You do something, did it work? And that kind of back and forth interrogative kind of experience is what we do as developers on a daily basis. We do something, then we see if it works, and we go to the next step.
Right.
And that's that back and forth between iterating between tasks of editing and an IDE, and then clicking save, and then deploying it, and then checking whether the deployment is what I actually desired, the deployment worked as I expected, are all my resources up and ready to go, and then using it and looking at logs to see whether or not the output is as expected. All those tasks, I think, are broader than Kubernetes. I think we use it for OpenWhisk. In fact, if you search on GitHub, we have a repository that's using the same core frameworks that our Kubernetes CLI tooling uses, but instead of orienting it towards Kubernetes, it's oriented towards OpenWhisk. So we have double-clickable downloads, for example, of client builds that will give you either a Kubernetes-based experience or an OpenWhisk-based experience. And they both follow the same basic mold. You issue commands, you get tabular graphical tables in response, you click on links, and then you can drill down to the details, and you can navigate from there on.
When I first started taking computer science classes in college, I thought programming was just a joke. In fact, I changed my major over to engineering and started doing computer engineering and chip design. Then I found Ruby, and I fell in love. I love Ruby. It was my first real programming language where I dove deep and really learned how to make software that makes a difference for other people. Since then, and the way that we got started with devchat.tv, we started a show called Ruby Rogues. It's currently in the 400s of episodes. We've talked to hundreds of people in the Ruby community, about the Ruby programming language, about Rails, and about what makes good programming. So if you're interested in Ruby Rogues, or you just want to hear a long series of experienced programmers talking about real problems, then go check out rubyrogues.com.
Right, and I guess what Nick is touching on, I think, is, as IBM research, our job is to actually do innovation. Mm-hmm. And so we look at, say, the ASCII terminal that we all know and love, and we look at CLIs. I mean, it's clear that ASCII terminals have survived the test of time. I mean, they work. But the actual nature of them hasn't changed since, for instance, the teletype days, right, where you're typing commands into a shell. Now, this isn't to say, again, that it's not useful. Like I said, it's withstood the test of time. But, we're now living in a graphical world as well. And is there a way in which we can now make sense of how do we take something that is solid and true, but also figure out ways in which we can then make it something new and make it something interesting? So I think there's the innovation part of the job that we're doing, which means that CUI itself is something beyond just Kubernetes. But then also, as an industrial research lab, we have to try to do things that are very practical. And if you look at, for instance, surveys that you've seen, like developer surveys from CNCF and other organizations, it is one of the concerns for developers that complexity of the cloud today, and particularly Kubernetes, is quite high.
Oh, yeah.
And it makes sense, right? Because Kubernetes is addressing a problem that is complicated, a large distributed system managing potentially hundreds of thousands of containers. And it was coming out of a heritage where the people that are using it, or the people that are writing it, they're living that day to day. And so a lot of the abstractions that you have in Kubernetes are focused on supporting those types of ops. It's a DevOps tool, but it's more on the ops side. And so I think where we can help with something like CUI is then to begin to innovate around that environment. And so it's a very, I know we're saying that CUI is broader than just Kubernetes, but Kubernetes is such an important target for us to try to improve, because we want people to use the cloud. Mm-hmm. We want you as a developer to not have to worry about all of the things that can go wrong with Kubernetes. And as Nick said, he spent his entire career trying to make things easier for you to do things. And the cloud is such a huge target that CUI can really, really help here. So Kubernetes, it is just one potential application, but it's a big one.
Yep, absolutely. So, there's a lot here that we talked about. Can you kind of just walk me through a workflow that I might use with CUI? So I grab it, I install it,
Sure.
let's say that I already have, a connection to a Kubernetes cluster somewhere, Microsoft or Google or DigitalOcean, or I've set up my own and I'm running stuff there already. How does KUI help me with that? And then we'll talk a little bit about, okay, I'm still on VPSs. How do I move my stuff over easily with KUI?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So first is, so we have some pre-built distributions. So first you would download for your platform. We have builds for Windows, Linux, and Mac. We could do others, but those are what we have for now. Or you can clone and own the repo. It's all open source. You can git clone it, npm install, and then npm start. And now you have the same thing as you would have gotten if you downloaded one of the pre-builds.
So it's written in JavaScript?
So what we've done is we've coded it in TypeScript, actually.
Okay.
Which compiles down to JavaScript. So it's what we've done in KUI is we've actually leveraged the Electron framework. So if you're familiar with Slack or VS Code, they're all and a bunch more, but those are two high-profile ones that are all also using the Electron framework. So KUI is some TypeScript code that compiles down to JavaScript and then gets shipped as part of an Electron application. So when that double-clickable that you can download or that you'll build yourself if you npm install will include the KUI code and of course Chromium and all the stuff that you get from Electron. And so the first thing you would do after downloading is you can choose to double-click on the executable and launch it, and then you'll have what you'll see when it launches up is a terminal. And from there on, you can use it as you would any other terminal. You can ls and pwd and cd and git clone and issue any other CLI commands that you might. You can issue Emacs and VI, any other terminal-oriented commands that you might. Or you can issue kubectl commands. And if you issue commands that KUI happens to have enhancements for, and the way we've architected KUI is that you can issue commands, and you can if there's a plugin, a KUI plugin that ships with the client that you downloaded that knows how to handle that command, you'll get an enhanced response, some sort of graphically enhanced response. If there's no registered KUI plugin that knows how to handle that command, you'll just get back whatever you would have gotten normally from a normal terminal. So we have in the default clients that we ship for Kubernetes, there's enhancements for kubectl and Helm. There's also some initial enhancements for the OpenShift CLI OC, and that's where we've started. We're very eager to accept contributions for other CLIs or to enhance the plugins we currently have. If you think there's a better way, for example, of visualizing logs than what you see, it's all open source. So we're definitely eager to accept feedback and contributions. So, for example, you might start by saying kubectl get pods. We actually have a shorthand. You can say kget pods if you want. And we also have some built-in support for tab completion. So if you have a pod named foo, you could say kubectl get f tab and it'll complete it. And if you use that full terminal by double-clicking, you'll get that tab completion without having to worry about configuring your ZSH or bash, with tab completion. It just comes out of the box working.
Nice.
And when you issue that kget pods, you'll see a table. Inside of the table, each row will just be a pod like you would have expected from a normal kubectl get pods response from the kubectl CLI. But instead, you'll see two main enhancements to that table. The first is that each of the pod names will be clickable. So I'll get back to that in a second, what happens when you click. But the second main thing you'll see is that the status column, whether the pod is online or offline, for example, or whether it's terminating, all the sort of standard Kubernetes status messages that are associated with resources, you'll see those, but we associate a color, a traffic light, red, yellow, green color with each of those. So we find that's a quick way of scanning your pods, the resources in your cluster, to get a sense of the overall status and health. Traffic lights, I think, are generally a good thing. So that's and if you type -w or --watch, so kubectl supports watching tables, and KUI does as well. So if I say kubectl get pods -w, then what will happen is that the rows will update. For example, if you on the side or some automated process changes the status of a pod, it terminates it or updates it with a new version, then the table will change, for example, from red to green or green to yellow. You'll see that just in line with the table.
Nice.
That's in contrast with, for example, the normal kubectl CLI, which also supports watching. But in a normal CLI, if you say kubectl get pods -w, it doesn't update the table. You'll just see sort of a new row fly by, sort of appended to the output every time some update. So CUI sort of enhances that watch experience by giving you a fixed table with the rows updating as things change. And then the second big thing, getting back to, I guess, to the first thing, is the clickability of the rows. So in kubectl on the normal CLI, if I wanted to drill down and get the details of that foo pod, I would have to type kubectl get pod foo -o YAML. That's just the sort of bizarre way that the kubectl developers had decided to drill down to the details of a pod. You have to say basically -o YAML or -o JSON.
Right.
And so that's for foo, something as short as foo, that's probably no big deal. But typically in a cluster, you're going to have pods whose names are auto-generated by some deployment or some other external mechanism, Istio, something is generating the name of that pod or resources generally. And so the resource names tend to be very long and cryptic. They're going to have a lot of numbers and characters in them. And so you're not going to remember them. You can maybe copy and paste them, and maybe you can tab complete them, but both of those end up being fairly tedious. So in CUI, in the CUI terminal, you would just click on that long name. And when you click on it, you'll see the details. And that's, I think, the second main way that CUI innovates. The first being just sort of the tabular, enhancements. The second main way is on what we display, how we display the contents of a resource. So pods, services, secrets, Helm charts, they're all resources in your cloud, and each of them has sort of their details. For example, a pod may have containers. Containers have logs. And those aspects of a resource, I think, are a nice way to anchor navigating the details of that resource. And so in CUI, what you'll see is that when you click on that pod is you'll see a sidecar slide in from the side, and you'll then get a split screen view. So now you'll be able to see simultaneously your terminal and all the tables that might be there. Okay. But then the other side of the screen, the right-hand side of the screen, sort of in a 60-40 split roughly, will be showing, in that sidecar, will be showing the details of that resource, the foo resource that you clicked on. And the tabs, it'll be a sort of a tabular view, and the tabs will show, for example, a summary of the resource. And then one of the tabs will also be able to show the full gory details of all the YAML. And then we have a couple of tabs kind of in between. For example, there's a tab that's just called containers. Right. It just shows me, I can then quickly then see what the status is of each of the individual containers inside of a pod. If I want to get the logs associated with a pod, or I want to get the events associated with a pod. In Kubernetes, those are sort of distinct concepts. The logs are the logs of the underlying containers, whereas the events are kind of lifecycle events for the resource as a whole. So CUI then manifests those as buttons in that sidecar. So if I want to see the logs, I click on Show Logs. In contrast, in normal CLI, you would have had to remember, okay, how do I get the logs? It's kubectl. It's not get logs, it's kubectl logs. Right. So you just have to remember a little bit of these details. And as a super duper expert, those things become second nature. But one thing I found just from a cognitive sort of perspective is that for myself, even with the years and years of development experience under my belt, there's some things that I just don't want to remember. Right. Because they're just, why should I remember that kubectl logs or kubectl -o YAML? There's just details, like the more little minute, unimportant details I have to remember, the less time I'm spending on the things I actually need to remember for my job. Right. And so I think that's really one of the last biggest theme of CUI as a whole, sort of transcends, I think, Kubernetes is how can we find, just as a community, that balance between what should be made into graphics and buttons, easy shortcuts like show logs and show events and container tabs. At what point do we go too far and become a pure console, and now you can't experiment and go off the rails? And that's, I think, where I want to treat CUI is actually a bit of a test bed and experiment in that discussion. I think that we've had some initial experiments on our own at IBM as to what the right balance is between CLI and typing and going off the rails and the matrix of a console, all the gory details which are important. You have to be able to go off the rails, but at the same time, how can we encode what's important for daily tasks that and get rid of the unimportant details and
right. Experience. And just to add to what Nick said, as CUI as a test bed, we hope that as a community, developers will look at CUI, and the way that Nick has architected CUI currently has a plugin architecture that has a formal API in which you can extend your own CLI. So you could just grab a boilerplate repo that you could just clone yourself, and as Nick says, clone and own. And you can either extend what we've already done with Kubernetes, or you have your favorite CLI that you use and you want to try to do some work around that with CUI, you could do that. Or you could take a new, when you write a new CLI, you now have the option of having this sort of interactive visualization, which you didn't have before. So now imagine if we can then unleash the developer community and say, hey, ASCII terminals are great, but you now have a new degree of freedom in which you can then exploit CLI tools. Again, that's, I think, part of a lot of the work that Nick and team have been doing in the past couple of months is really trying to make sure that that's architected so that it is an experimental platform and it does have APIs that you could, again, just conform to and easily write your own extended CLI.
Yeah, I'm really digging that in the sense that, I've used all kinds of other tools, grep, netstat, and it's like minus what to get what I want, right? Or to get it formatted the way I want. And so, yeah, just by having kind of an easy and quick command that I can just throw at it and have it come back with the information I need. And then, sometimes iTerm or some of the other ones, they'll be able to pick out, this should be clickable or whatever, right? And so I can command click something and it'll take me to the path on my machine. Visual Studio Code's terminal also does that. But yeah, just having a really convenient, this is what I expect. I've had similar setups in stuff like Emacs, right? Where you click something or hit something and it'll open another panel. But yeah, just having that default there, or not that default, that behavior there by default, so that I don't have to remember it and I can just kind of navigate it. What's the word I'm looking for? In a very natural way.
I think that's the challenge that I think that the CUI framework side of CUI is trying to address is how do I enhance that? What happens when I click on that link? Mm-hmm. And in most cases, in like iTerm and VS Code, those terminals will recognize, for example, URLs. And so they have some built-in logic for recognizing that pretty common pattern that there's going to be URLs emitted somewhere in the console. And so so the question is, how do we make that richer? How do we make it much more sort of ontological, if you will?
Right.
That's going this, and navigational maybe is a better way of saying it. And I think that's really one of the biggest themes in modern development is that we're navigating, we're experimenting. I want to go from deployments to pods to containers to logs, and maybe to events. And each event has an associated resource. I want to go to that resource that emitted the event, and that's a natural part of the development experience is this navigation through some complex ontology of resource types. And so that gets us back to the question is what happens when I click? Mm-hmm. And I think that in some ways, CUI is essentially that, is a way of enabling developers of resource types. For example, if you have a new resource type that you've developed for your own company, that's I'll call it the Provo research type, to keep in the Salt Lake clear. I don't know, whatever. You have some new resource type, and it's going to have some semantics you'd like to encode for your own developers. Like, for example, what tabs should be shown? What are the important aspects of that resource type that should be surfaced that are more important than others? You need to prioritize the information. What happens? What are the relationships between a resource type A and a resource type B? Are they connected in any way? And that's one of the things that we're trying to enable with CUIs is allowing for that kind of much sort of deeper and richer enablement of CLIs beyond just URLs.
Makes sense. A few years ago at a JavaScript conference, I was approached by Nader Dabit, and you might know him for the React Native Radio podcast. He's also a developer evangelist for Amazon. And when he came to me, we had a conversation about React Native. And the thing that I love about React Native is that it's approachable, it's web technology, and it's cross-platform. And it makes a lot of things really easy for developers to jump in and do interesting things on mobile with JavaScript. So we've had this show now running for several years, React Native Radio, where we interview people about the React Native ecosystem, some of the things that are coming out in React and how they affect mobile, and other options that you have for mobile development. So if you're doing mobile development, you're doing it in JavaScript, you're looking for a good option, or maybe you're just trying to stay current with React Native, then go check out React Native Radio at reactnativeradio.com. And so you can just use this because it wraps over kubectl or kubectl is kind of the way my brain translates that. But yeah, and so if I have that set up already to access my cluster, then I get the tools and I get all the niceties right off the bat. Yeah. What am I looking at then if I'm just getting into Kubernetes? Like, how does CUI help me there?
Yeah. So this is the case where we're getting much more into the experimental side of CUI, but we've definitely had some thoughts there. But this is one of these cases where it's a lot more thought is needed. So in one of the plugins we've developed for CUI, it was actually developed by a couple of an intern and someone who's since left, is a sort of a tutorial kind of Katacoda style extension to CUI, but in a terminal kind of way. So, for example, I'd like to be able to make it so that when I have kubectl get pods, if I've issued a partial command, for example, it's incomplete. Kubectl get return. I don't know what that, or maybe it's kubectl return. I'd like to have some guidance. And if you do that in kubectl today, you'll get this mountain. You can try it yourself. Type kubectl return, and you'll get back a mountain pages, multiple pages of usage information. And it's great because it's giving me all the ways in which I can use kubectl, but it's not structured particularly well from a learning perspective. And so we have a couple of thoughts on how we can enhance this experience of learning a command line interface, but also learning the nature of development in that world, in a Kubernetes world or an OpenWhisk kind of world. And so we have the plugins that enhance both the usage output of command line, of normal command lines. So in CUI, when you type kubectl return, you'll get something that's a little prettier. I think it's, from a designer perspective, I think it still needs some work, but it's certainly prettier and more useful. There's clickable links, there's some structure, more like what you'd expect to see from a console. If you click on the question mark, the help in the upper right of the terminal, you'll get some guided tutorials in a Katacoda kind of style. So you'll be able to get some initial learning about Kubernetes or about OpenWhisk in the case of OpenWhisk. And so we have some tutorials written for both of those. This is definitely a case, I think, that there's a lot more to explore.
Right. And I think, again, since we're talking about exploratory things, I can just touch on this, but we have collaborations and discussions with our AI research colleagues where we're kind of trying to say, can we have approaches to, kind of reasoning, automated reasoning, and so on, to, again, help people who are new with next best action. People, when they try this, they try these commands next. Or help them, again, with the navigation, because a lot of this is navigating, the resources and objects in a particular system, Kubernetes in this case. So can we, again, encode that knowledge and have kind of various AI techniques, either based on model-driven reasoning and so on, or even just based on history, right? Usually people, when they do these kinds of commands, they do these other kinds of commands. So we have kind of initial thoughts about this, some exploration that's planned and going.
Yeah. I mean, like, for example, in the Istio context,
right,
being able to say, I'd like to roll out a new version of this application. And there is a particular command line incantation that you can issue if you remember the complex command structure to make that happen. But can we make it a little more natural, the way you express that
Correct.
desire?
So I think we have explored ideas that are, we have heard about these virtual assistants, right, with customer care and all of these scenarios, right? We hardly talk to a real person on the phone anymore when you call Verizon, for example, or any of that. So virtual assistants in this context, virtual assistants for developers, I think we have had explorations around that also. So as Nick is saying, can I interact in a more natural way, and the virtual assistant is the one that's going to then have this encoded kind of knowledge graph, and is going to help you collect the right information, plug in the parameters that otherwise you would have to explicitly lay down and specify, right? And it's going to do that from the context that's already there. So from the context of the previous, I might have just deployed a new version and then saying, hey, now increase the traffic to my just deployed new version. So instead of having to spell out every possible thing that the actual API asks you for, can I, minimize kind of the information I ask for and fill in the details based on the context, based on the model that I've built and understood, and based on the history of what has been done previously. And we actually explored this even in the context of collaborative workflows, right? So usually, if you're rolling out a new thing, there might be 2 or 3 personas involved there, right? In saying, hey, I have this new thing ready to roll out, and then somebody might run the test, and there might be some kind of, it might be gated on various other things happening before you get the green signal and go ahead. And, how can you kind of take some of these DevOps workflows and make the interactions much more productive, much more easier, and remove the unnecessary details, right? So I think these are some of the thoughts for where this deep domain expertise, not just in the specific command and how to type it, but sometimes there are difficulties even in understanding and navigating the resource space, the objects of this ecosystem. Do I even know, when I roll out a new thing, there's probably a version, a service, maybe 2 or 3 abstractions that are actually involved there. And I, as a developer, don't even know that. So I think helping people navigate this by building the ontologies, the knowledge graphs, the models, and then with concrete things like next best action or context, can we help them navigate this?
Nice. We're kind of getting toward the end of our scheduled time, and I don't want to go over. Are there places where people can go look at documentation or watch videos that'll walk them through this or things like that? Yeah.
So we have we have a GitHub that hosts the main CUI, and you can get there. I think if you go to CUI.tools, we have kind of a short link that will bring you to a landing page that offers internal links to their GitHub site and so on. You can also just search for, just go to IBM/CUI on GitHub, and you'll get to the site for the main resource site that has download links. You can clone and own it from there, and so on.
Awesome, very cool. One thing that we do at the end of the show, we do 2 things. One is just to give you all an opportunity to share links to your Twitter, like your Twitter handle, your GitHub handle, your blog URL, anything like that. So if you all want to just, go around the horn and let us know where to find you online, that would be great. And then we'll move on to the other segment.
Yeah, we'll start with Nick.
Okay. Yeah. So on GitHub, I'm Starpit. Sci-fi reference you guys can look up. But and we actually have a Medium blog. I was just trying to remember. I always go to it from a short link, so I can't even remember the name. It's the Visual Web Terminal, the Visual Terminal, I think, or the Graphical Terminal, I think is what I called it on Medium.
Yeah, that shows your desire to not remember unnecessary things. So you don't remember
the in my browser history,
Medium link. Yeah, I think for me, I guess maybe I will just say at Priya Nagpurkar is my Twitter handle. I think my GitHub will not be nearly as interesting as Nick and Paul, so I'll leave that out. I'll leave it at kind of Twitter for me. And I think the other thing I will just say is we mentioned IBM CUI, right? So that's the GitHub repo. I think really and CUI.tools. I think that would be kind of the place to go from. I'll hand over to Paul.
Yeah, on Twitter I'm Paul C. Castro. I recently actually started to use it the way it was meant to be used. I had originally joined it years ago because I was doing a research project and I wanted to just use the APIs. But then someone said, oh, doing Twitter is good. So I switched over. So I have an elite set of followers, which is like 5. Happy to have anyone who wants to. They can follow me. I try to post things about serverless these days and also the work that's going on in our group. I'm also Paul C. Castro. Oh, no, I'm Paul Castro on GitHub. And you can find me there.
Awesome. The last segment of the show is picks. And what that is just shout outs about stuff you like. So, we have people pick movies or TV shows. We've had people pick tech tools that they're using. All kinds of stuff, right? So I'm going to throw out a couple of picks just to kind of give you an idea of how this works. And then you can shout out about whatever you want. So one pick that I have is Discourse. Discourse is an online forum system. I really, really love it. I've lately been playing with it to put together a JavaScript forum because I couldn't find one that I liked. And I'm hoping to be able to build that community up. So you can go to javascriptforum.net and join in. It's brand new as we record this, but we're a couple weeks ahead. So by the time this comes out, I should have a bunch of past hosts, guests, etc. from JavaScript Jabber, which has nearly 400 episodes. And so we should be able to have a good set of conversations there. I'm also trying to decide if I want to split it off for like an Angular forum, React forum, or Vue forum. Vue has its own forum though. It's just half Chinese. And anyway, I don't read or write or speak Chinese, so it's a little rough getting those digests. But anyway, yeah, really, really enjoy that. So I'm going to pick that. I'm also going to pick codefund.io. Disclaimer, Eric Berry and Nate Hopkins, who are kind of the two main guys behind it, are good friends of mine. Nate was actually my mentor when I got into programming 14 years ago. And Eric was kind of instrumental in getting me into podcasting and things like that. So I know them very well, but it's really interesting at ethical advertising for programmers. So codefund.io, go check them out. And then the last pick, I started watching a TV show that I've really enjoyed. It's on Amazon Prime. It is an Amazon Prime original. And I'll just warn you, if you're a little bit sensitive to like language and content, some of the Amazon Prime originals are a little bit heavy on cursing and sex scenes and things like that. Some of them aren't, and this one hasn't been so far. So, they have dropped a few F-bombs. So if that's enough to turn you off, then don't watch it. But that said, it's really, really fascinating show. And essentially the setup is that the Allies lost World War II. Okay. And it takes place in like the 60s. And so the Eastern U.S. is controlled by the Nazi regime, and the West Coast is controlled by the Japanese imperial regime. And
the Philip K. Dick novel, right?
Yes, it's based on the Philip K. Dick novels. So I'm only halfway through the first season, so I can't tell you and this is kind of how it goes because, I've only kind of seen a few of the main characters interact. So I've really enjoyed it, though. They kind of go out into no man's land and wind up meeting up there and, you find out about these characters. But it's really, really fascinating. My wife has a deep fascination with World War II because her grandfather fought in it. So did mine now that I think about it. Anyway, so yeah, really enjoyed that. So those are the picks that I have.
My pick is so I try to get away from technology whenever I can. So my pick is I found on YouTube there's this guy he has the most amazing videos. It's crime pays, but botany doesn't. If you're interested in the natural world at all, this is a guy from Chicago. He lives in the Bay Area currently, but he's from Chicago. He has a super heavy accent. He has a tattooed centimeter ruler on his finger so that when he's pointing at flowers, he can see how big they are. He has this amazing memory for the Latin names of every possible flower in the United States. It's just amazing. It's just super entertaining to watch. You learn a lot, and he's just entertaining. It's just amazing. Amazing guy. Sardonic humor is amazing.
Nice. Priya, do you have anything that you want us to enjoy?
Sure. I think so. I would like to pick kind of two other open source projects that I'm really passionate about. And the first one is called Solsa, SOLSA. And it's, you can also find it at github.com, IBM Solsa. And I think this is also along the lines of developer simplicity, complexity of evolving software. Kubernetes as an underlying platform and software architecture as code, basically. So I think I just see it as that evolution, right? We are pushing the boundaries on serverless here. And here is another kind of thought we have that's going to really simplify, I think, building enterprise applications at scale on cloud. So that's Salsa. That's my pick number one. And I think the pick number two, again, experimentation, I think just as a theme, I also am really passionate about in technology and life, So iterate is this thought around enabling experimentation. So iter and 8, the number, .tools. This is also what we open sourced recently and also relevant to the DevOps community, right? A/B testing, canary rollouts, problem determination, and SRE, going into those areas. Those are my two picks, and I think they're really along these lines of further simplification and tooling.
Awesome. Paul?
So I guess I have a couple. One just real quick, and I'm sure a lot of listeners have probably used this. It's the Wi-Fi analyzer. I do some volunteer work at a school that meets, bi-monthly, and I have surprisingly fallen into having to do network engineering for them. So this sort of just happened by chance, and just extending the Wi-Fi and being able to analyze it, being able to use that tool has been incredibly useful, and I highly encourage you to use it if you have problems with your Wi-Fi. The second pick that I have is not it is technology, but it's not related to cloud. It's a guitar tuner. Now, if you're familiar with guitar tuners or stringed instrument tuners, they have these tuners that you can clip on the instruments. And then when you play the string, it vibrates, and then the tuner is able to pick out the note that you're playing based on the vibration. But it's a particular type of guitar tuner that I like, which I recently discovered. It's a very low-profile guitar tuner that fits right onto the head of the instrument. And now a typical guitar tuner, like I explained, if you see like musicians using it, they kind of stick out, and you can see this thing clamped onto their instrument. But this low-profile tuner is very, very hard to see, but yet it's there when you need it. And what I really like about it is that it works when you press. I mean, it works just like a normal guitar tuner, but because it's integrated in so nicely, because it's so low profile, it's almost like it's part of the instrument. So it really changes the experience of you having this tuner, so that it's a much more seamless experience from playing your instrument and then checking the tuning and then playing it. I mean, you can go back and forth, and really, if you're on stage or if you're again just doing a recital or something, it's just part of the instrument, and I really like it. I won't mention the brand, but if you look for this online, you'll see this low profile tuner.
Oh, please mention the brand.
All right. Maybe they'll pay me. Diodario makes a twin set of low-profile guitar tuners, which they clamp on very nicely to instruments. Nice.
I have a ukulele. Will it work on that?
It will work on that. It will definitely work on that.
Nice. And then which Wi-Fi analyzer do you go for? Is it just an app on your phone, or?
Yeah, it's the Android app. If you just search for the Wi-Fi analyzer, you'll find it.
All right. Good deal. I just want to make sure that I'm linking up to the right one. All right. Well, this has been really fun. Thank you all for coming. I know we went a few minutes over, but the picks are fun. So
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah.
all right, well, we'll go ahead and wrap up, folks. And in the meantime, max out. Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.